Hello, my name is Dr. Manny Straley. First thing I'd like to do is thank you for attending this PopTopiks webinar on it's really informal. It's not even a webinar, it's informal tips on listening. This is all the information I've collected over the years, including my ABD in counseling psychology and all my masters in it and things like that, as well as teaching some courses at St. Joe's not St. Joe's, at Johns Hopkins University to the graduate students on counseling psychology skills. And that's been a few years, but I want to give you a little history of like why PopTopiks decided to do a 24-hour listening session. I don't know if you recall, but when the millennium came in 1999, Peter Jennings committed to a 24-hour broadcast where he was up for 24 hours broadcasting the new millennium or the year 2000. You know, that was Y2K and all things like that. So we were inspired by that. We were also inspired by Zappos and Tony Hsieh's work there as a CEO. He recently retired, very recently retired from that role. But his model of customer service was to be on the phone all the time, and the customer service reps as long as they needed to be. I don't know if any of you ever worked at a customer service queue. I was a customer service rep for a few years and tech support rep, and there was a lot of pressure to complete those calls as quickly as possible. But in his model, you don't complete those calls completely as soon as possible. What you did is you just stayed online as long as the customer needed you and just to listen, essentially. And there's a record, I think, about 9 or 14 hours. I'm not sure. It was around 9/11 or on 9/11 where a woman stayed on with a customer rep for that long. And it's in the if you Google it, you'll see it in Zappos and longest call. So what I really want to do is give you some tips on listening, and this is some of the things I did as a therapist and things like that. One of the things that I learned early on is I want to talk about 3 things with you essentially around listening. What do I do when I listen? Some of the listening basics that I use, and some of the advanced listening skills that you might want to encounter during this. Again, I'm not here to teach you how to listen. I'm just here to give you some tips on what I've learned from listening. There's probably other things out there that you've learned and I can learn from and things like that. So this is not a comprehensive presentation at all. It's just some of the things I want to give to you all before you do this session on September 3rd and 4th, this Thursday and Friday. So what do I do when I listen? So one of the things I learned from one of my mentors, who was the founder of social therapy, Fred Newman, and Lois Holtzman as well, for the collaborative to Fred Newman, was somebody asked him, what do you do to help you listen really well? Like, how do you know you're listening really well? I think that was the question that someone had asked him. And he said, you know, one of the most difficult things to do is to listen very well. And the moment I know that I'm not in that room with that person, I know I'm not listening. So there's an awareness factor, and you just aware that you're not distracted by something else. And he said the trick is to try to come back into that room as quickly as possible. So that's what I ask you to do. If you're distracted by something, including your thoughts or your feelings or anything like that, just become aware of yourself. And also, he also said what you need to do is accept that you're distracted. So it's not abnormal to be distracted. We all have distractions when we listen and things like that. But you want to be genuine about it. You could give that distraction to someone and be genuine. You could just say, hey, I wasn't listening. It happens a lot. When I tell my clients that I'm not listening, and it's not often that I don't, but they get a chuckle out of it because you're being genuine, you're being real. So that's what you want to do as well. So being real, staying in the room, radically accepting who you are, where the person is as well. Those are some really important things. And then I think you could get to a point of empathy when you sort of establish that stance with the person you're working with. So then you try to understand where they're coming from in that world, and that's when you start using basic listening skills, which we'll get into, to understand what's it like to be on that person's shoes. Now, Dr. Marjorie Levitt, who I studied with under Temple, she was one of my professors there, would say to get to that same size shoe, so being in in the same shoes as that person, but trying to find that right fit to be in that right size shoe, I thought was really a remarkable observation that she had made. So that's what you want to try to do. Once you find the size, you still want to get to know that person and sort of understand where they're coming from and things like that. And again, one of the things you need to do is become self-aware of yourself. You know, don't leave that room with distraction and things like that. And another thing I like to do is really clarify what that person really is trying to tell me and things like that. And we'll get into that with basic listening skills like reflection, paraphrasing, and summarizing. And the last thing, you know, that I really love to do, and this is this is Mr. Fred Rogers, not Carl Rogers. I love Carl Rogers because he has that stance. And one of the tips I do have to say is actually go find a video of Carl Rogers, who is the founder of this Rogerian therapy, but one of the founders of humanistic models in psychology. And it's just his way of being there, his presence and just being with you, being there is incredible. So just take a moment to either watch one of his videos with one of his clients. It's just incredible. And then the curious and learning about the person, that's Mr. Fred Rogers, who we all know. Just a phenomenal person to watch when he's working and talking to people. And if you could find like an interview with him, just an informal interview, it's just wonderful to see how he just goes to that level of curiosity. And that's what you want to do when you're listening, so you can understand that person better. You can start empathizing with that person. And that's really the goal, is just to be there unconditionally with really not much bias. You're going to always have bias, but you want to minimize or eliminate that bias with that person, so you're not distracted and your feelings or your thoughts are not really giving you a moment of what Freud would call transference or countertransference. That person might create emotions in you or thoughts in you, and you might react. You might just react without thinking unconsciously. So you want to be consciously aware of that process that you have with that person, and sort of come back to that room and be in that room, going back to the Fred Newman notion of coming back to that room when you're distracted by something. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about listening basics. A lot of you already know this, but when you're on this call with the person, you could always reflect on whatever the content is, what they're saying, and whatever the emotional tones are to it. Again, that you might be asking them, well, how has your year been? What have you been doing? What can you learn about? And, you know, if they're saying that my year has been awful, you can say, wow, it sounds like it's been, you know, a very emotional year. Or, you know, can you tell me, you can explore it and probe it. Can you tell me more about it? And then reflect upon it. Again, you also reflected on the content. You know, they might say something like, well, this year I've been doing a lot of thinking about life and what I want to do. And you could say, oh, so it sounds like it's brought up a lot of options for you. You know, and you could clarify if you got that right. You know, this is what I'm hearing from you. And you could begin to paraphrase or summarize it. You know, paraphrasing is just really, you know, instead of like reflecting, we just, you know, instead of like saying everything word by word, word for word, you're just saying, oh, so it sounds like it's been a year it sounds like there's a lot of options for you now. The other thing you talk about is summarizing, which is a little bit, you know, it's like a bunch of paraphrases all strung together is the way I look at that. All right, so those are really basic listening skills, and exploring is something you probably want to do with the person as well. You know, but you don't want to be like a Hollywood trial lawyer. You might want to just say, well, tell me more about that, and let them keep on going. Just keep that conversation alive. And that's really what you do with exploring, with how, what questions, tell me more. You know, I never thought about that. It's really interesting. How would you go about doing that? You know, but the other thing you want to do, avoid, and this is more advanced skill, is getting into problem solving. Problem solving could be good in this context because people are in the industry and they're looking for answers. So it's okay to do that. But you have to remember, when you problem solve, it takes you out of a traditional therapeutic listening stance. So you just don't want to go, they might be wanting to tell you things that are more deeper than just trying to solve the problem. They just want someone to listen and be heard. So that's the issue with problem solving. So we tend to tell you to avoid it, but there could be an instance where that's appropriate. That's why it could be an advanced skill. Silence is okay. There are been some exceptional speakers and master therapists who are very, very good at using silence to move the process forward. So just use it. You don't have to overanalyze it. Be with the silence is what I always tell people. I'm trying to teach this, and it's really connecting to your genuineness of that. It's okay to be with silence. You can have people sometimes say that they're listened to in 45 minutes of silence or 50 minutes of silence. So it's okay. It's okay to have a session that's just silence. Sometimes that's all what people ever need. And for those of you who have, a lot of significant relationships, that silence is, and it's exceedingly important to process. So if you're asking someone, or you're reflecting and say it's been a really tough year, and they're not, after like 2-3 seconds, they're not reacting. Well, that's okay. You need to let them process information. So when you say things, or reflect on something, or summarize or paraphrase, give them time to process the information. That's really key. Try to watch the timing of that and interrupting. That's a very advanced skill. Timing is just something you just learn. I don't really know how to teach that well, but I know when my students just interrupt because they're trying to get to that next question, the next thing, and they're moving in the problem to be an issue. Now, they could come back with a lot of challenges or a lot of things they want to talk about. So this is where you start the skill of focusing. So the easiest thing to do is to reflect back upon that and say, wow, you said a lot of different things to me. Sounds like a lot's going on for you. Is there something you really want to focus on today or talk about? So that's a focusing skill. Another thing you could talk about is the process comment, like what the person is doing in the conversation with you. So they might be avoiding a question. And I mean, in this little thing, we're not getting into a therapeutic thing, but there might be a moment for to make a process comment. Like, I've noticed that you avoid this question. Is this something you're aware of? So that's a process comment. You're just making a comment on the process of what you're observing in the relationship. It's very powerful. It usually stops people from doing something. So it's kind of one of our hidden skills as a therapist, if we really want to time things and stop things and make people really think about things. And it's also clinical. Like, if people just avoid, a process comment, and it's the same, and you observe the same sort of process over and over again, that person's avoiding a topic all the time. And it's just not avoidance. It could be that they're happy all the time when they talk about something, and that could be something that you talk about. I notice that when you talk about your dogs, you're very happy. I know when I talk about my dogs, I get very happy. So someone might say something like that to me. Like when I have to talk about COVID-19 health issues, I'm putting on all these preventative gear or protective gear. It's annoying that you have to do that, right? So somebody might say, I noticed that you're annoyed when you talk about putting on a mask before you go into the store. I know that it's necessary at this point, but I also wish it wasn't, like most of us. So there's 3 remaining sort of advanced skills here. And I'm not covering everything, like I said earlier. I'm just giving you the tips and the things that I'm remembering and the things that I've taught about and things like that. So disclosure is important too. So you might want to talk about yourself, like I talked a little bit about myself in this segment or this training or tip presentation. So when you're disclosing, you don't want to over disclose, because then you're going to be looking like a narcissistic person. But you also want to disclose. The timing of that has to be really important. Yeah, it's really just to normalize sort of things. It's nice when let's say you reacted in a way that's not quite, you didn't think was quite normal, and then the therapist or the listener says, or your friend says, I've been mad like that, or I've been pissed off like that, or I've been happy like that around this sort of thing. it's okay. You know, it normalizes the conversation. It makes you real. It makes you genuine. But you want to do it in those contexts that it's real, it's genuine, and you're not taking over the conversation, and you're not also not being, quote, narcissistic. Because if you consistently disclose and you give information about yourself, that person probably never wants to come back and listen and be your friend or your therapist or be part of anything around you if you constantly do that all over and over again. I talked about avoiding problem solving already. The last thing, which I think is very, very difficult, and it's very hard for beginning folks to really use themselves and just be genuine and authentic while doing all these things. It's very difficult to manage all these things. And, you know, I'm learning a lot about how to do this myself after many years of learning about it. Really knowing yourself and being confident in yourself and authentic is really incredible for a listening. And I think that's why listening sometimes really works really well with your closest friends, and your, you know, in terms of your confidants, because they're usually there for you, and they really are being genuine, and they'll tell you what it is, and you have the relationship that they can really tell you things that no one else can, because if they tell you that they give you really critical feedback or, you know, any type of feedback, you're able to handle it because you have that relationship, those many years of that bond that you have with that person. But being genuine and authentic is really something you want to be as a listener in this, for the PopTopiks session that's happening. So I hope this has helped you. You know, again, I would emphasize that you go and see videos on Carl Rogers if you have a chance. Rogers is just an incredible therapist in action, in my mind, beyond his contributions to the psychology field. So I would tell you to look at those videos as well. But I hope this has been helpful. I hope you have a great listening session. And above all, the executive producers, thank you very much for being a listener in this experiment, and 24 of you going out there and just listening to the community and the assessment industry and education industry, and hopefully other industries. We're hoping to get other groups to come on in and just be listened to. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a great listening session on Thursday and Friday, September 3rd and 4th. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.